Betrayed by her evil ex, the Hell's Angel leader saved her. Now she's back for revenge. A young woman runs for her life in the dead of night, bruised, terrified, and hunted by the man who once promised to love her. She thinks she's about to die, until the most feared biker on the street stops his roaring motorcycle and chooses to save her instead of turning her away. But the danger doesn't end there, because her ex isn't just evil. He's powerful, connected, and ready to destroy anyone who stands between him and the dark secret she stole. Just when she begins to heal, a shocking twist forces her to vanish from the world and come back stronger than anyone ever expected. Protected by a brotherhood she never thought she'd trust, she's no longer running, she's hunting. But when the man who saved her is thrown into the line of fire, can she take down the monster who broke her before he destroys the only family she has left? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Rain pelted Sarah's bare shoulders as she ran through the darkened streets, each step sending jolts of pain through her bruised ribs. The flash drive clutched in her trembling hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, its encrypted contents the only proof of Victor's true nature. Her wet feet slapped against the cold pavement, leaving small, bloody footprints behind her. The industrial district loomed ahead, a maze of warehouses and abandoned buildings. Sarah's lungs burned as she gasped for air, her heart hammering against her chest. The sound of boots hitting concrete echoed behind her, Victor's men closing in. She'd seen what they could do, had witnessed their brutality firsthand during her 3 years trapped in Victor's world of wealth and violence. "There! Down that way!" a gruff voice shouted, followed by the beam of a flashlight cutting through the darkness. Sarah ducked into a narrow alley, pressing herself against the wet brick wall. Her thin nightgown clung to her skin, offering no protection from the cold or the rough surface behind her. She forced herself to keep moving, even as her legs threatened to give out. The crack of gunfire split the air. Sarah felt white-hot pain slice across her upper arm, a bullet grazing her skin. She bit back a cry, stumbling forward as warm blood trickled down her arm. Her vision blurred with tears and rain as she ran blindly, no destination in mind except away from the men hunting her. Chain-link fence appeared in front of her, stretching high into the darkness. Sarah's fingers curled around the cold metal as despair washed over her. She was trapped. This was the edge of Hell's Angels territory, the notorious motorcycle club she'd been warned about since moving to the city. Victor had always said they were savages, criminals who would show no mercy to someone like her. The sound of motorcycles cut through the rain, growing louder with each passing second. Sarah's legs finally gave out, and she slid down the fence to the wet ground. This was it. She would die here, alone in the rain, with only a flash drive full of secrets to show for her attempt at freedom. Headlights swept across the alley as multiple bikes roared to a stop. Through her blurring vision, Sarah made out the imposing figures of leather-clad men. One of them, taller and broader than the rest, swung off his bike and approached her. The others hung back, their engines idling. "Boss, we should leave her," one of them called out. "Could be a trap. You know this ain't our business." The tall man crouched down in front of Sarah, and she found herself looking into eyes that were surprisingly gentle despite his intimidating appearance. His face was weathered but handsome, with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble. A long scar ran down one side of his neck, disappearing beneath his leather jacket. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "Sarah," she whispered, her teeth chattering from cold and shock. "Please, they're coming." The man, who she would later learn was Jax Maddox, studied her for a moment longer. His gaze took in her bruised face, the blood on her arm, the way she cradled her ribs. Something hardened in his expression, but when he reached for her, his touch was careful. "I've got you," he said simply, sliding one arm under her knees and the other behind her back. Sarah found herself lifted against his chest, the leather of his jacket cool against her cheek. The flash drive remained clutched in her white-knuckled grip. "Jax, man, think about this," another rider warned. "Whoever's after her ain't gonna stop at our borders." "Then we make sure they know exactly what happens when they cross those borders," Jax replied, his voice carrying an edge of steel beneath its calm surface. He turned toward a large warehouse nearby, its windows glowing with warm light. "Get the gates open. And Miguel, call Doc Stevens. Tell him we need him here now." Sarah's head spun as Jax carried her through the rain. She caught glimpses of other bikers moving quickly, the sound of heavy metal gates grinding open, boots on concrete. The warehouse interior was surprisingly clean and well-maintained, with a large open space filled with motorcycles and tools, and a comfortable living area off to one side. Jax laid her gently on a worn leather sofa. Sarah tried to focus on his face, but darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision. She heard him issuing orders, something about securing the perimeter, watching the streets, calling in reinforcements. "Stay with me, little bird," Jax said softly, draping a warm blanket over her shivering form. "You're safe now. No one's getting in here without going through me first." As consciousness slipped away from her, Sarah realized something profound. For the first time since Victor had entered her life, she felt truly protected. The flash drive pressed against her palm, and her last thought before the darkness took her was that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Jax straightened up from the sofa, his expression grim as he took in Sarah's battered form. "I want eyes on every approach," he commanded to the men gathering around him. "Double the patrols. Anyone comes near our borders, I want to know about it." He paused, looking down at the unconscious woman who had literally stumbled into their world. "And someone find her some damn shoes." The warehouse erupted into coordinated activity as his men moved to follow his orders. Motorcycles roared to life outside as patrols headed out into the rain-soaked night. Through it all, Sarah remained still on the sofa, her fingers still tightly wrapped around whatever she'd risked her life to protect. The morning sunlight filtering through high warehouse windows slowly drew Sarah back to consciousness. Every breath brought a sharp reminder of her bruised ribs, and the events of the previous night crashed back into her memory like waves against rocks. She was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was alive. Trying to sit up proved more challenging than she'd expected. A gentle hand touched her shoulder, steadying her as she winced. "Easy there, honey," came a warm, maternal voice. "You took quite a beating last night." Sarah blinked, focusing on the woman beside her. She was older, perhaps in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical braid and laugh lines around her kind eyes. She wore a worn denim jacket with the Hells Angels patch, but there was nothing threatening about her presence. "I'm Martha," the woman said, adjusting the pillows behind Sarah's back. "Been with the Angels longer than most of these boys have been alive. Let's get some food in you before we worry about anything else." Another club member, a weathered man with white hair, appeared carrying a tray laden with scrambled eggs, toast, and what smelled like homemade coffee. "Martha's right," he said, setting the tray carefully across Sarah's lap. "Best medicine is a full stomach. I'm Frank, by the way." The food smelled wonderful, and Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. As she took her first bite of perfectly seasoned eggs, heavy boots announced Jax's arrival. He looked exactly as she remembered from the night before. Tall, solid, with that same gentleness in his eyes that seemed at odds with his imposing presence. "How are you feeling?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside the sofa. Sarah swallowed carefully. "Better. Thank you for everything." Jax nodded, his expression serious but kind. "When you're ready, we need to talk about who's after you. But first, eat." As Sarah worked her way through the breakfast, she found herself sharing pieces of her story. The words came haltingly at first, then easier, how she'd met Victor at a charity gala, his charm and attention sweeping her off her feet. How the control had started small, suggestions about her clothes, her friends, her schedule. Then came the criticism, the isolation, the first time he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. "I found something," she said, her hand instinctively going to the flash drive she'd refused to let go of, even in sleep. "On his computer. I wasn't supposed to see it, but—" She trailed off, old fears closing her throat. Jax didn't push. Instead, he asked, "The bruises on your ribs, that was him?" Sarah nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "And the bullet graze?" His security team, when I ran." Jax's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "You're safe here, but I need to know what kind of heat might be coming our way." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, the flash drive a heavy weight against her chest. "He's dangerous," she managed. "Powerful. I should go. I don't want to put anyone else at risk." "That ain't happening," Martha said firmly, taking the empty breakfast tray. "You need rest and healing, girl, and you need people around you who know how to handle danger." Throughout the day, Sarah watched as Jax quietly conferred with his men, strengthening patrols and checking security systems. She noticed how the other club members treated him, with respect rather than fear, loyalty earned through trust rather than intimidation. As evening approached, Jax found her looking out one of the warehouse windows. "Feel up to a walk? Might do you good to stretch those legs a bit?" Sarah nodded, grateful for the chance to move. As they stepped outside into the compound, she was struck by how different reality was from her preconceptions. Children played in a fenced yard while their parents worked nearby. An elderly man in a veteran's cap was teaching a group of young riders about motorcycle maintenance, his lesson peppered with stories about discipline and responsibility. They passed a large garage where a gray-haired mechanic was hunched over what looked like a child's bicycle, carefully adjusting the training wheels. He waved to Jax, then smiled warmly at Sarah. "That's Joe," Jax explained. "Keeps every kid in the neighborhood rolling. Says it keeps him young." As they walked, Sarah saw more signs of community. A small vegetable garden tended by several older members, a makeshift basketball court where teenagers played under the watchful eyes of their biker uncles, a communal dining area where people shared meals and stories. "It's not what I expected," she admitted softly. Jax led her toward another section of the warehouse where several motorcycles were parked. "Most people see what they expect to see," he said, crouching down beside one of the bikes. "Makes it easier for us to protect what matters." Sarah watched as he began working on a radiator pipeline, his large hands surprisingly delicate with the small parts. There was something mesmerizing about the careful way he handled each component, the same gentleness she'd experienced when he'd carried her to safety the night before. The setting sun painted the compound in warm golds and oranges, and Sarah found herself relaxing despite everything. The man beside her, with his scarred hands and kind eyes, represented everything she'd once been taught to fear. Yet watching him work, seeing the respect he commanded through protection rather than violence, she felt the first tentative stirrings of trust taking root in her heart. The rumble of motorcycles pulled Sarah from sleep just as dawn was breaking. She blinked, taking a moment to remember where she was, still safe on the leather couch in the Angels' compound, wrapped in the blanket Martha had given her. Outside, engines growled to life as the morning patrol prepared to head out. Sarah pushed herself up carefully, her ribs protesting but not as sharply as before. The warehouse was already alive with activity. Coffee brewing, boots on concrete, quiet conversations. She made her way to the small kitchen area where Martha was pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. "Here you go, honey," Martha said, handing her a steaming cup. "Jax wants to talk when you're ready. He's in the office." Sarah nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. She knew it was time. The weight of the flash drive against her chest had become too heavy to bear alone. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the office where Jax sat reviewing security reports. He looked up as she entered, his expression gentle but serious. "Sleep okay?" "Yes, thank you." Sarah sat in the chair across from him, gathering her courage. "I need to tell you everything. About Victor. About what I found. About why they're really hunting me." Jax set aside his papers, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out the flash drive. "Victor Kessler isn't just a tech CEO with a temper. He's using his company to develop and sell illegal weapons tracking systems. This drive, it has prototype designs, buyer lists, everything." She took a shaky breath. "When I found it, I knew I had to run. He'll kill to keep this secret." Jax's expression darkened. "Weapons tracking? You're sure?" Sarah nodded. "The files are encrypted, but I saw enough. He's selling to anyone who can pay. Cartels, terrorists, corrupt governments. The systems let them track their shipments and their targets." Her voice caught. "People are dying because of what he's built. I couldn't just look away." "Jesus," Jax muttered, running a hand over his face. He stood, pacing the small office. "This is bigger than I thought. No wonder he sent professionals after you." He stopped, fixing her with an intense look. "Why didn't you tell me this yesterday?" "I was scared. I'm still scared," Sarah admitted. "Everyone who knows about this ends up dead or disappeared. I didn't want to put your people in danger." Jax moved closer, his voice firm but kind. "Listen to me. You did the right thing taking this, and you did the right thing telling me now." He pressed a button on his radio. "Need all officers in the meeting room. Now." Within minutes, Jax had his core team assembled. Sarah watched as he laid out the situation. No details about the weapons systems, just that they were dealing with serious corporate criminals who would stop at nothing to retrieve what Sarah had stolen. "Double the patrols," Jax ordered. "I want eyes on every approach. Reinforce all entrances, and send out scouts, quiet ones. Need to know if they're already in the area." The men moved with practiced efficiency, turning the compound into a fortress. Sarah watched from the office window as teams welded additional bars to windows, checked security cameras, and positioned lookouts on the roof. The atmosphere grew tenser as the hours passed, but no one complained about the extra work needed to protect a stranger. Late in the afternoon, one of the scouts radioed in. "Boss, we've got movement. 3 black SUVs circling the industrial district. Professional types, definitely armed. They're being careful, but they're looking for something." "Or someone," Jax replied grimly. He turned to Sarah. "They're here." The warehouse erupted into controlled chaos as the Angels took defensive positions. Jax led Sarah to an interior office, one with no windows and multiple escape routes. "Stay here," he said firmly. "I've got men at every entrance and escape route. No one's getting to you without going through all of us first." Sarah watched as he coordinated his people, struck by how naturally leadership came to him. These men weren't following him out of fear, like Victor's mercenaries. They trusted him, believed in him, and now they were all risking their lives to protect her. As night fell, the warehouse settled into tense vigilance. Sarah sat in the dimly lit office, trying not to jump at every sound. She'd been alone and afraid for so long, running from Victor, carrying the weight of what she'd discovered, thinking she had to handle everything by herself. But now, surrounded by people willing to stand between her and danger, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. Jax came in around midnight, pulling up a chair beside her. In the soft light, his expression was both determined and gentle. "We'll figure this out," he said quietly. "A long-term solution. Somewhere safe where you can build a new life. You're not alone in this anymore." Sarah looked at him, seeing the strength and kindness that seemed to define everything about him and his club. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Neither of them knew just how soon that long-term solution would need to come, but in that moment, sitting together in the quiet office, Sarah finally felt truly safe. The morning sun had barely crept over the warehouse district when Sarah heard the first shouts from the rooftop lookouts. Her heart jumped into her throat as boots thundered down metal stairs. "Drone," one of the angels called out. "Northeast quadrant moving slow and steady." Sarah rushed to the window, her hands trembling as she peered through the blinds. There it was, a sleek black drone hovering just beyond the compound's perimeter, its camera clearly scanning the area with mechanical precision. "Get away from the window," Jax ordered, suddenly beside her. His gentle but firm hand guided her back. "That's definitely Victor's tech. I recognize the model. Military grade, thermal imaging capable." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop shaking. "He's escalating. The drones, the mercenaries. He won't stop until he finds me." Her voice cracked. "Or what's on that drive?" Jax's expression hardened as he watched the drone through a gap in the blinds. He spoke into his radio, directing his men to maintain positions but stay out of sight. The morning crawled by in tense silence as the drone made repeated passes. Around midday, Jax called a meeting with his most trusted advisors, older members who had been with the Angels for decades. Sarah sat quietly in the corner of the meeting room, listening as they discussed options. "We can't keep playing defense forever," one of the elderly veterans said, his weathered face creased with concern. "Eventually, they'll find a way in." "What about moving her to another safe house?" someone suggested. "Too risky," Jax replied, shaking his head. "Victor's got resources we can't match. He'd track us." An older member named Mac, who Sarah had noticed was often Jax's closest advisor, leaned forward. "There's only one way to make someone stop hunting. Make them believe there's nothing left to hunt." The room fell silent as understanding dawned. Jax turned to Sarah, his eyes serious. "We need to make Victor believe you're dead." Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. "Dead?" "A convincing accident," Jax explained carefully. "The right evidence, the right witnesses, the right story spreading through the right channels. Once Victor believes you're gone, he'll stop looking." But that would mean..." Sarah struggled to process the implications. "I'd have to disappear completely. My whole life. Gone." "You'd be free," Jax said softly. "Free to build a new life somewhere he can't reach you." Before Sarah could respond, alarms blared through the compound. Everyone sprang into action as reports came in, 3 of Victor's men attempting to breach the south fence. Sarah heard gunfire in the distance as the Angels drove them back. When the situation was contained, Sarah found Jax in his office, cleaning a small cut on his arm from the skirmish. "They're getting bolder," he said without looking up. "Next time might be worse." Sarah took a deep breath. "Do it," she said. "Make me disappear." The plan came together with military precision. The Angels had apparently done this before, helping people vanish when necessary. They chose Sarah's car as the centerpiece, positioning it on a remote road where it would appear to have lost control. They planted evidence, carefully measured bloodstains, shattered glass with traces of her DNA, torn pieces of clothing. Sarah watched in amazement as they doctored traffic camera footage, created false witness statements, and began spreading whispers through their network about a tragic accident involving a woman fleeing unknown pursuers. The story would reach Victor through multiple sources, each confirming the others. As evening approached, Sarah stood before a mirror, barely recognizing herself. They'd dyed her hair darker, given her clothes that changed her silhouette, and created documents for her new identity. The woman staring back at her looked like a stranger. "Ready?" Jax asked from the doorway. She nodded, unable to speak. They drove in silence to an overlook above the chosen crash site. In the growing darkness, Sarah could see the angels making final preparations. The car was in position. Soon, they would trigger the controlled burn that would make identification of any remains impossible. Standing beside Jax in the cool night air, Sarah watched as flames began to consume her old life. The heat reached them even at this distance, and tears rolled down her cheeks as she thought of everything she was leaving behind. Her job helping at-risk youth, her small apartment filled with books, the few friends she'd managed to keep despite Victor's control. "Sarah Hayes is dead," she whispered, tasting the strange truth of it. Jax's steady presence beside her offered silent support as they watched the fire grow. This wasn't just an ending, she realized. It was a beginning too, terrifying and unknown, but somehow full of possibility. In choosing to disappear, she had finally found a way to truly escape Victor's reach. The flames reached higher into the night sky, their orange glow reflecting off the tears on Sarah's face as she mourned her old life and stepped into the darkness of her new one. 3 days into her new life, as Emily Hart, Sarah woke before sunrise in the modest 2-bedroom apartment that now served as her safe house. The space was simple but secure, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood where the Angels' extended network kept watchful eyes on every corner. She went through her morning routine carefully, practicing the mannerisms and habits of Emily Hart. Emily wore her newly darkened hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Emily favored earth-toned clothes that helped her blend into crowds. Emily walked with purpose, but never drew attention. Sarah was learning to become Emily in 100 small ways. 2 riders, Mike and Tony, arrived precisely at 7 o'clock each morning. They were both older members of the Angels, chosen for their steady temperaments and keen observation skills. Under their guidance, Sarah learned to scan rooms for exits, to notice when she was being followed, and to move through public spaces without leaving memorable impressions. "Always take different routes," Mike reminded her as they walked to the corner store. "Change up your timing. Notice patterns but don't create them." Tony focused on teaching her basic self-defense. In the safe house's small backyard, he showed her how to break holds, where to strike to disable an attacker, and most importantly, how to trust her instincts. "Your body knows when something's wrong before your mind catches up," he explained, demonstrating a simple escape technique. "Learn to listen to that feeling." The mornings were filled with these lessons in survival, but it was the afternoons that began to heal Sarah's spirit. The women's shelter where she volunteered was a converted Victorian house, its rooms filled with sunlight and hope. The Angels had supported it quietly for years, providing security and maintenance while staying carefully in the background. Sarah, now Emily, spent hours sorting donations, organizing supplies, and most importantly, listening to the women who found refuge there. Their stories were different versions of her own, tales of control, manipulation, and eventual escape. She recognized her own fears in their eyes, and her own determination in their voices. "Sometimes starting over is the bravest thing you can do," one woman told her while folding donated blankets. Sarah nodded, fighting back tears as she thought about how completely she had started over. The shelter's director, Martha, seemed to sense something familiar in Sarah's gentle way with the residents. "You have a gift for this work," she said one afternoon. "These women trust you because you understand." As evening approached each day, Sarah would feel a flutter of anticipation. Jax's visits had become the anchor points of her new life. He arrived like clockwork as the sun set, usually carrying grocery bags or folders of documents needed for her new identity. But it was the conversations that Sarah treasured most. They would sit in her small kitchen, sharing simple meals and complicated truths. Jax spoke of losing his parents young, of finding family among the angels, of learning that strength could be gentle. Sarah slowly shared pieces of her past, the slow erosion of her confidence under Victor's control, the moment she discovered his true nature, the terror and triumph of escape. "I used to think being strong meant never being afraid," she told him one evening as they sat on her tiny balcony watching the stars emerge. "Now I think maybe it's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway." Jax's smile was soft in the gathering darkness. That's exactly what it is. These quiet moments revealed layers to him that Sarah hadn't expected. His deep faith in second chances, his fierce protection of those who needed help, the thoughtful man behind the imposing exterior. Their connection grew in the spaces between words, in shared understanding and comfortable silences. One particularly late evening, Sarah was sorting through a new box of donations at the shelter when she found a discarded newspaper. The sight of Victor's face on the front page made her blood run cold. He stood at a podium, looking appropriately grief-stricken as he announced the creation of the Sarah Hayes Memorial Foundation for Domestic Violence Prevention. The article quoted him extensively. "Losing Sarah has opened my eyes to the silent suffering of so many women. I couldn't save her, but perhaps through this foundation, we can save others." The reporter praised his touching transformation from bereaved fiancé to passionate advocate. Sarah's hands shook as she read. Victor was doing what he did best, turning tragedy into opportunity, manipulation into power. He was using her death to polish his public image, while simultaneously gaining access to vulnerable women through the foundation. She was still staring at the paper when Jax arrived for his evening visit. He took one look at her face and crossed the room in long strides, gently taking the newspaper from her trembling fingers. "He's using me," she whispered. "Even dead, he's finding ways to use me." Jax pulled her into a careful embrace, his steady presence anchoring her as reality shifted again. "We knew he would try to spin this," he said softly. "That's who he is." Sarah pulled back, wiping angry tears from her eyes. "Those women who'll trust his foundation, they'll think he wants to help them, but he'll use their stories, their data, their trust. I can't let him." "Sarah," Jax's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't expose him. Not yet. It's not safe." She knew he was right, but the knowledge sat like lead in her stomach. Victor was twisting her story, using her tragic passing to create more opportunities for control and exploitation. The safety of her new identity suddenly felt less like freedom and more like chains. As she watched Jax read the article, his jaw tightening with each paragraph, Sarah felt resolution crystallize within her. She couldn't stay hidden forever, couldn't let Victor continue using her death to hurt others. Someday, somehow, she would have to find a way to reclaim her story. Early morning sunlight streamed through the safe house kitchen windows as Sarah stirred honey into her tea. The familiar rumble of motorcycles outside had become a comforting soundtrack to her new life. But today felt different. After a week of restless nights and careful planning, she was ready to share her decision with Jax. He arrived right on schedule, carrying fresh bagels and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. Sarah watched as he settled into the chair across from her, his expression softening as it always did when they were alone. "I can't stay hidden forever," she said without preamble. "Victor needs to be stopped." Jax's hand stilled on his coffee mug. "Sarah, you're just starting to feel safe. We can't risk—" "Look at this." She pulled out a manila folder she'd been compiling. "I've been tracking his weapons distribution through my old non-profit connections. He's not just selling guns, Jax. He's creating dependence in vulnerable communities." She spread out documents showing how Victor's shell companies infiltrated community organizations, offering security systems that secretly tracked residents' movements. Supply manifests revealed weapons flowing into neighborhoods through seemingly legitimate channels. "These are my people," Sarah's voice cracked. "The ones I used to help protect. He's using them like chess pieces." Jax studied the evidence, his jaw tightening. The morning light caught the tension in his shoulders as he absorbed the scope of Victor's operation. Finally, he looked up at her. "You're right," he said quietly. "We can't let this continue. But if we move against him, we do it smart. You'll need training." Relief flooded through Sarah. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed his support until she had it. The next days passed in a blur of intense preparation. The Angels compound became her training ground, each member contributing their expertise. Sarah learned how to check for surveillance, secure communications, and document evidence without leaving traces. Her muscles ached from self-defense training, but she pushed through, driven by purpose. Hank Doc Morrison became her most patient teacher. The elder angel had served as a military medic, and his gentle guidance helped Sarah master her anxiety responses. They would sit for hours in his workshop, where he taught her breathing techniques while tinkering with motorcycle parts. "Steady hands come from a steady heart," Hank told her one afternoon, demonstrating how to hold a camera without shaking. "Fear's natural, darlin'. The trick is working with it, not against it." His weathered face reminded Sarah of the grandfather she barely remembered, and his quiet wisdom became a cornerstone of her days. When panic threatened to overwhelm her, Hank's calm voice would guide her back to center. "Healing isn't linear," he reminded her often. "Some days you'll feel strong as steel, others like you're starting over. Both are valid, both are progress." Sarah noticed how the other angels deferred to Hank's experience, even the younger riders who typically bristled at authority. He had a way of offering guidance that felt like suggestion rather than command. During one particularly challenging training session, Sarah's hands wouldn't stop trembling as she practiced picking up objects without leaving prints. Frustration built until tears threatened. Hank simply pulled up a stool beside her. "Tell me about your favorite memory," he said. "What?" "Just trust me. Describe something that makes you smile." As Sarah talked about childhood summers spent reading in her grandmother's garden, her breathing steadied. Her hands grew still. "See?" Hank smiled. "Your body knows peace. Sometimes it just needs reminding." The practical training was matched by hours of strategic planning. Jax brought in experts to teach Sarah about digital security and evidence gathering. She learned how to document paper trails, secure electronic communications, and build cases that would stand up to scrutiny. "Knowledge is armor," Jax told her during one late-night strategy session. "The more you understand his operation, the safer you'll be." Their evenings often ended with them poring over documents together, connecting pieces of Victor's empire. Sarah's administrative experience helped her spot patterns in the data, while Jax's street knowledge filled in crucial gaps about underground operations. One night, exactly a week after she'd first proposed taking action, they made their breakthrough. Sarah was cross-referencing shipping manifests with the data from her flash drive when she noticed a pattern. "Jax, look at this," she called him over. "These container numbers, they're cycling through ports in a sequence, and the volumes are increasing." Jax leaned over her shoulder, his presence steady and warm as they analyzed the data together. "He's scaling up," he muttered. "These are way bigger shipments than his usual operations." Sarah pulled up another document. "And look at the timing. All these shipments are converging in the next month. He's planning something big." They worked late into the night, piecing together the puzzle. Victor was coordinating his largest weapons movement yet. Multiple shipments converging from different ports, all carefully disguised as legitimate cargo. "This is it," Sarah said softly. "This is how we start taking him down. If we can document this shipment, prove what he's really moving." Jax nodded, his expression grave but determined. "It's a solid lead. But Sarah," he turned to face her fully, "this puts us on a timeline. Once we start moving against this shipment, there's no going back." Sarah met his gaze steadily, finding strength in how far she'd come from that terrified woman who'd collapsed at the Angel's gate. "I know, but I'm ready." The evidence spread before them told a clear story. Victor's careful facade was about to enable his biggest operation yet. But now, for the first time, Sarah had the knowledge and support to fight back. As she and Jax continued analyzing the data, the path forward became clear. They had their first real chance to begin dismantling Victor's empire, one piece of evidence at a time. The morning air bit through Sarah's thin jacket as she stood across the street from Hope Forward Foundation, the non-profit where she'd worked for 3 years before Victor. Her new dark brown hair hung straight around her shoulders, and oversized glasses masked her features. Still, her heart hammered as she watched familiar faces arriving for work. "You don't have to do this," Jack said quietly beside her. He wore plain clothes instead of his usual leather, dark jeans and a gray hoodie that helped him blend into the morning crowd. Sarah took a deep breath. "Yes, I do." She straightened her shoulders. "Those records will prove Victor's using charitable donations to launder money for weapons. Deals." They crossed the street, Sarah's sensible flats clicking against the pavement. The lobby's familiar scent, coffee and old carpet, hit her as they entered. Linda, the receptionist who'd once brought Sarah soup when she was sick, barely glanced up. "Can I help you?" Linda asked, not recognizing her former friend. "Emily Hart," Sarah said, using her new identity smoothly. "I have an appointment to review donor records for a potential grant partnership." They'd created the perfect cover, a legitimate consulting firm's letterhead, a carefully crafted digital trail. Sarah felt a strange mix of pride and sadness at how easily she now moved through her old life as a ghost. In the records room, Sarah's fingers flew over filing cabinets she'd once organized herself. "Here," she whispered to Jax. "Victor's shell companies all followed the same pattern, large donations just before major weapons shipments." Jax stood guard while Sarah photographed documents with a tiny camera designed to look like a pen. Her hands stayed steady now, thanks to Hank's training. Each click of the shutter felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Through the window, she could see her old desk. Someone else's family photos now decorated the space where she'd once dreamed of making a difference. The ache in her chest surprised her. Not because it hurt, but because it felt distant, like looking at a stranger's life. They finished gathering evidence within an hour. As they left, Sarah heard a familiar laugh. Melissa from accounting, who'd been planning her wedding the last time they'd talked. Sarah kept walking, her eyes forward, letting go of who she used to be. Back at the Angel's tech hub, a converted warehouse space filled with monitors and servers, Sarah and Jax met with the club's technology experts. Mickey, a former cybersecurity specialist with tattoo-covered arms, whistled low as he reviewed their findings. "These offshore transfers are something else," Mickey said, typing rapidly. "Victor's good at hiding his tracks, but he's got a pattern. See how these accounts cascade?" He pointed to flowing data on his screen. "Each transfer bounces through 5 or 6 shells before landing in accounts tied to weapons manufacturers." Sarah leaned forward, absorbing every detail. "Can you trace where the prototypes are being tested?" Mickey grinned. "Already on it. These power consumption records are interesting. There's a compound outside the city drawing massive energy, but it's registered as a data center." His fingers flew over the keyboard. "Satellite imaging shows way more security than any normal tech facility would need." "That's it," Sarah breathed. "That's where he's testing the weapons." Over the next 2 days, Sarah worked tirelessly with the Angels to build their case. She organized financial records, cross-referenced shipping manifests, and created timelines of Victor's operations. Each piece of evidence made her stronger, transforming her fear into determination. The older Angels noticed the change in her. Where she'd once flinched at sudden movements, she now moved with purpose. Her voice grew stronger in strategy meetings, her suggestions more confident. Even Hank commented on her transformation during one of their talks. "You're finding your steel," he told her with grandfatherly pride. "Not by becoming hard, but by remembering who you really are." On the 3rd evening, Sarah stood with Jax on the warehouse roof, watching the city lights flicker to life. The spring air had warmed, carrying the scent of blooming trees from a nearby park. She felt different up here, lighter somehow, as if she'd shed the weight of victimhood. "I spent so long being afraid," she said softly, watching the sunset paint the clouds pink and gold. "Afraid of Victor, afraid of failing, afraid of living." She turned to face Jax, who'd become her anchor in this new life. "But now, for the first time in years, I feel alive again." The city spread before them like a map of possibilities. Sarah could see the high-rise where she'd once lived with Victor, but it no longer filled her with dread. Instead, she felt a quiet strength, knowing she was finally fighting back. Jax's hand found hers in the growing darkness, warm and calloused. "You're braver than you know," he said simply, his voice low and sincere. Sarah squeezed his hand, letting the moment settle around them. In his words, she heard not just praise, but understanding, recognition of how far she'd come from that rain-soaked night when she'd first stumbled into the Angels' world. They stood together as the stars began to appear, 2 people who'd found unexpected trust in a dangerous world, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The city lights blurred into a tapestry of golden points, and Sarah felt the last pieces of her old self falling away, replaced by someone stronger, someone who was finally, truly awake. Dawn broke over the Angels' compound with an uneasy stillness. Sarah stood before a mirror, securing a tactical vest that felt too heavy and too real. Her fingers traced the edge of her disguise, dark clothes chosen to blend into shadows, hair tucked beneath a black cap. In the reflection, she barely recognized herself. "You don't have to do this," Jax said from the doorway, his voice gentle but concerned. "We have enough people for the operation." Sarah turned to face him, chin lifted with determination. "Hank taught me how to be strong. I need to prove I can be." The tech compound sat isolated on the outskirts of the industrial district, its security cameras sweeping methodically across manicured lawns. The Angels had spent days studying patrol patterns, shift changes, and blind spots. Now, as afternoon faded toward evening, their plan unfolded with precision. Mickey's tech skills got them through the first layer of security, loops feeding into the cameras while Sarah and 3 angels slipped through a maintenance entrance. The facility's sterile corridors felt familiar, the same cold efficiency Victor brought to everything he touched. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs as they moved silently through the building, but her hands remained steady. Hank stayed close, his presence reassuring as they reached the central server room. "Quick and quiet," he whispered, standing guard while Sarah connected their drive to download the evidence. Screens flickered with schematics of prototype weapons, test footage showing devastating power, encrypted messages discussing black market deals. Each file confirmed Victor's crimes, building their case piece by piece. 5 minutes, Mickey's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Security rotation incoming." They worked efficiently, gathering everything they could. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, copying folders of damning evidence. Just as they finished, Mickey's warning came again. "Movement at the perimeter. Something's wrong." The first gunshot shattered the evening calm. Sarah's blood ran cold as shouting echoed through the corridors. Victor's mercenaries had found them. Hank grabbed her arm, pulling her toward their escape route as chaos erupted around them. They ran through darkening hallways, the sound of combat growing closer. Sarah's lungs burned as they reached an emergency exit, but hope died at the sight of armed men converging on their position. Hank shoved her behind a concrete barrier just as bullets sparked against metal. "Stay down," he ordered, returning fire to cover their position. But they were surrounded, outgunned, with more mercenaries closing in. Hank's expression changed, a look of grim determination crossing his weathered features. "When I move, you run," he said quietly. "Don't stop. Don't look back." "Hank, no!" Sarah started to protest, but he cut her off. "You're family now, kid. Family protects their own." Before she could stop him, Hank broke cover, drawing enemy fire. Sarah watched in horror as he engaged the mercenaries, creating the diversion they needed. Multiple hands grabbed her, other angels pulling her toward safety, but her last glimpse was of Hank being overwhelmed, forced to his knees as Victor's men swarmed him. The escape passed in a blur of motorcycle engines and wind-whipped tears. By the time they reached the safe house, shock had settled into Sarah's bones like ice. She stood in the middle of the command room, shaking, as the angels assessed their losses and planned their response. "We'll get him back," Jax promised, his voice hard with barely controlled rage. "Victor won't dare kill him. He'll want information first." But Sarah barely heard him. All she could see was Hank's face in that final moment, the father-like protector who'd sacrificed himself for her. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, guilt crushing her chest. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I brought this danger to your door, to Hank." Her voice cracked. "Victor will torture him because of me." The angels mobilized around her, planning rescue scenarios, calling in favors, gathering intelligence. But Sarah remained lost in her spiral of self-blame. As night deepened, she found herself alone in Hank's workshop, surrounded by his tools and the lingering scent of motor oil. Her fingers found his old dog tags, left hanging on a workbench hook. The metal was worn smooth from years of handling, engraved with his service information and the values he lived by. Sarah clutched them until the edges bit into her palm, remembering how he'd taught her to steady her hands, to find strength in her fear. But now that strength felt like a lie. All her progress, all her courage seemed to crumble in the face of what her presence had cost. The thought formed like poison in her mind. If she surrendered to Victor, offered herself in exchange for Hank's freedom, maybe she could undo this damage. Moonlight filtered through dusty windows, casting shadows across the workbench where Hank had spent countless hours teaching her about engines, about life, about healing. Sarah sat in that darkness, the dog tags cold against her skin, feeling as though she'd shattered everything she'd built. The woman who'd found her voice, her purpose, her family. She seemed to fade away, leaving only the echoes of guilt and the weight of a choice that could save Hank or destroy everything they'd fought for. Dawn crept over the city skyline, painting the rooftop in soft golden hues. Sarah stood at the edge, her fingers still wrapped around Hank's dog tags, shoulders curved under the weight of a sleepless night. She didn't turn when she heard footsteps behind her, recognizing Jax's steady gait. "You've been up here all night," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Sarah's voice was raw. "I keep seeing his face, Jax. That last moment before they took him." She closed her eyes against fresh tears. "He's suffering right now because of me." "No." Jax's tone was gentle but firm. "He's suffering because of Victor, because of evil men who hurt innocent people. Not because of you. If you hadn't come here, Victor would still be hurting people, building weapons, destroying lives." Jax turned to face her fully. "Hank knew exactly what he was doing yesterday. He protected you because he believes in you, in what we're fighting for." Sarah's fingers tightened around the dog tags. "I could end this. If I went to Victor, offered myself—" "Stop." Jax's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "That's not what Hank would want. Remember what he taught you about standing tall? About finding strength in your fear?" Memories flooded back. Hank's patient voice guiding her through self-defense moves, his quiet wisdom during late-night talks, the way he'd squeeze her shoulder and tell her she was stronger than she knew. "He saw something in you, Sarah. We all do. The woman who refused to let Victor win, who's been fighting to protect others even when she's scared." Jax's eyes held hers. "Don't throw away everything you've built. Honor Hank by being the fighter he helped you become." The morning breeze carried distant city sounds as Sarah absorbed his words. She looked down at the dog tags, thumb tracing the worn edges. "Then I want to help get him back. Not from the sidelines. I need to be there." Jax studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but we do this smart. Together." They descended to the command center, where angels had been working through the night. Maps and surveillance photos covered the walls, tracking possible locations where Victor might hold Hank. Mickey, their tech specialist, waved them over to his computer station. "Got something. Been monitoring communications, cross-referencing building blueprints. They're holding him in a sub-level beneath the main compound." Sarah leaned in, studying the screen. "Those are the old maintenance tunnels. I remember seeing plans for them when I worked in Victor's office." "Can you draw what you remember?" Jax asked, spreading out a blank paper. Sarah's hand was steady as she sketched access points, security checkpoints, ventilation shafts. The angels gathered around, contributing intel, forming a rescue plan. Hours passed as they mapped every detail, considered every angle. By afternoon, Sarah retreated to her room to prepare. She changed into dark tactical gear, but before zipping up her jacket, she slipped Hank's dog tags around her neck. Standing before the mirror, she took deep breaths like he'd taught her. "Find your center," she whispered, hearing his voice in her memory. "Fear is natural. Courage is choosing to act anyway." A knock at her door revealed one of the elder angels, Martha, holding a steaming mug. "Thought you might need this, honey." Sarah accepted the tea gratefully. "I keep thinking about what Hank would do." Martha sat beside her on the bed. "That man's been through more wars than most, seen more darkness than anyone should. But you know what kept him going? Believing in something bigger than himself." "He believed in me," Sarah said softly, "even when I didn't." "Still does." Martha squeezed her hand. "And he'd be proud seeing you now." The afternoon light shifted toward evening as final preparations were made. Weapons were checked, communications tested, positions coordinated. Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. Not the absence of fear, but something deeper. Purpose. She joined the others in the garage as sunset painted the sky in fierce oranges and reds. Motorcycles lined up in formation, riders checking last-minute details. Jax stood beside his bike, conducting final checks. "Ready?" he asked as she approached. Sarah touched the dog tags under her jacket, feeling their solid presence against her heart. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. In its place was quiet resolve, built from everything Hank had taught her about courage, about family, about standing up against darkness. "Ready," she answered, swinging onto the bike beside Jax. Around them, engines rumbled to life, the sound echoing off concrete walls like thunder. As the garage doors opened to the darkening sky, Sarah felt strength flowing through her veins. Not just her own, but the collective strength of this unexpected family who'd taken her in, taught her to fight, showed her what real protection looked like. The convoy rolled forward into the gathering dusk, Sarah's heart beating in time with the engines. They were going to bring Hank home. And this time, she wasn't running from the fight. She was riding straight into it, fear transformed into resolve, weakness into purpose, just as Hank had always believed she could. The night air hung heavy with tension as Sarah crouched beside Jax near the compound's outer wall. Above them, clouds obscured the moon, providing natural cover for the angels positioned strategically around the perimeter. Her heart thundered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady as she checked her communications earpiece one final time. "Remember the route?" Jax whispered, his breath visible in the cold. Sarah nodded, recalling the maintenance tunnels she'd mapped out. Service entrance leads to the sub-level corridor. 2 rights, then left at the junction. On Jax's signal, the first team disabled the external sensors. Sarah and Jax led their group to a rusted utility door, exactly where the schematics had shown. The lock yielded to their specialized tools, and they slipped inside like shadows. The tunnel stretched before them, lit by dim emergency lights. Their footsteps echoed softly despite their care. At the first intersection, they heard voices approaching. The team pressed against the walls, holding their breath as 2 guards passed nearby. "3 more patrols on this level," crackled Mickey's voice through their earpieces. "Moving northwest." They encountered the first real resistance at the second checkpoint. 4 mercenaries spotted them, and the confined space erupted in controlled chaos. The angels moved with practiced efficiency, subduing the guards without firing shots that would echo through the tunnels. Sarah's heart nearly stopped when they reached the sub-level. More guards patrolled here, their boots clicking on concrete floors. The team split up, creating diversions to thin out the security presence. Through her earpiece, Sarah heard scuffles and takedowns from other sections. "Wait," she whispered, grabbing Jax's arm. A familiar ventilation grate caught her eye. She recognized it from the building plans. That section wasn't in the current schematics. It's an old holding area. They found the cell block behind a heavy steel door. Through the small window, Sarah saw him first. Hank, slumped against the wall but conscious. His face was bruised, but his eyes still held that familiar warmth when he saw them. "Took you long enough, kids," he managed as they broke through the lock. Jax helped Hank to his feet while Sarah supported his other side. The Elder Angel was weak but determined, gritting his teeth against obvious pain. They had nearly reached the main corridor when klaxons began blaring throughout the facility. "Well, that's not good," Hank muttered. Victor's voice crackled through the compound's speaker system, smooth and mocking. Sarah, did you really think I wouldn't recognize you?" Coming back for the old man? How predictably sentimental of you." She felt Hank tense beside her, but they kept moving. Victor's words followed them through the tunnels. "You could have stayed dead, lived your little borrowed life. Now you forced my hand. Again." "Keep moving," Jax ordered as guards' shouts echoed from multiple directions. They fought their way back through the complex, the angels providing coverage as they half-carried Hank. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets sparking off metal walls. Sarah ducked instinctively, feeling rounds whiz past her head. The final stretch to their exit point became a gauntlet. Victor's men had positioned themselves at key points, trying to box them in. The angels responded with coordinated precision, creating openings for Sarah and Jax to move Hank through. They burst out into the night air as sirens wailed across the compound. Motorcycles roared to life, angels falling into protective formation around them. Sarah held tight to Hank as Jax gunned his engine, leading the escape through side streets and industrial zones. The chase stretched for miles, Victor's vehicles in pursuit until the angels split into predetermined routes, confusing their tail. By the time they reached the secondary safe house, an old farmhouse outside the city, they'd shed the last of their pursuers. Inside, they eased Hank onto a prepared bed. The elder angel was pale, but breathing steadily as Martha began treating his wounds. Sarah held his hand while the others secured the perimeter. "You shouldn't have come for me," Hank said softly. "You'd have done the same," Sarah replied. A weak smile crossed his face. "Taught you too well, didn't I?" Watching Hank's labored breathing, feeling the rage of Victor's taunts still ringing in her ears, Sarah felt something crystallize inside her. This wouldn't end, couldn't end, until Victor was stopped completely. The fear that had driven her for so long transformed into steel determination. Dawn broke over the safe house as Sarah stood at the window, watching the sky turn from purple to gold. Her hands were steady now, the trembling finally gone. Behind her, she heard Jax's familiar footsteps. "I'm done running," she said without turning. "We need to end this, not with guns, but with truth." Jax moved beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "What are you thinking?" "A live broadcast. Show everyone exactly who Victor is." Sarah turned to face him. "He's always been careful to keep his public image spotless. But if we can get him to confess, show his true face." Jax studied her for a long moment. "It's risky. He'll be dangerous when cornered." "I know. But I'm not afraid anymore." They gathered the Angels tech team in the basement command center. Mickey, their communications expert, laid out the equipment they'd need: miniature cameras, wireless transmitters, encrypted channels to stream directly to news outlets and federal authorities. "We can wire the penthouse in advance," Mickey explained, showing them the building schematics. "Multiple angles, backup systems. Once he starts talking, everything goes live." Sarah nodded, memorizing the layout. "He'll be there alone this afternoon. Board meetings on Thursdays. He always clears his schedule after." They spent the morning preparing. The Angels positioned lookouts around Victor's building while their tech team set up the broadcast hub in a nearby office space. Sarah changed into a simple black dress, one that reminded her of outfits she'd worn in her old life. Jax caught her arm before she left. "You don't have to do this alone." "I do," she said softly. "He needs to see me as vulnerable. That's when he shows his true self." At 2:00 in the afternoon, Sarah walked through the lobby of Victor's building. The security guard's eyes slid past her. They'd been quietly replaced by angels hours ago. In the elevator, she took deep breaths, touching the hidden camera pinned to her necklace. The penthouse doors opened silently. Victor stood at his desk, his back to her. When he turned, the shock on his face was genuine. "Sarah," His voice held disbelief, then shifted to that familiar smooth charm. "My God, you're alive. I've been sick with worry. Have you, Victor?" Her voice was steady. His expression flickered. "Of course. When I heard about the accident, the charity I started in your name." "You mean your latest front for weapons money?" The charm vanished. His eyes went cold. "Careful, Sarah. You're making accusations you can't support." "I saw the files, Victor. The shipping manifests. The test footage. Those weapons you're selling. They're killing innocent people." "Progress requires sacrifice," he snapped, mask falling away completely. "You think those communities you love so much will survive without protection? I'm giving them the tools they need." Sarah moved closer, drawing him out. "Tools that make you millions while destroying lives." "Someone will always sell weapons," Victor snarled. "At least my tech is superior. The tracking systems, the remote detonation capabilities. Do you know how many governments are begging for these designs?" Sarah touched her necklace. The signal. Across the city, screens lit up with Victor's face, his words streaming live. "You're admitting to illegal weapons sales?" she pressed. "I built this empire." His voice rose as he stalked toward her. "Every shell company, every offshore account, every prototype, it's mine. And you thought you could steal it all with one flash drive?" Understanding dawned in his eyes too late. He lunged for her with a mauto roar of rage, but the door burst open. Jax tackled him as angels poured in from hidden positions. They had Victor pinned when federal agents stormed the penthouse, weapons raised. "Victor Kessler," the lead agent announced. "You're under arrest for weapons trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy." Sarah watched as they led Victor away in handcuffs, his perfectly tailored suit wrinkled, his careful image shattered. His eyes locked on hers as he passed, not with charm or rage now, but with the helpless fury of a man who had destroyed himself. 1 week after Victor's arrest, the spring sun warmed the renovated community center in downtown Portland. Inside, volunteers arranged chairs and hung banners bearing the new Heartlight Foundation logo, a simple beacon of light breaking through darkness. Sarah stood at the podium, adjusting note cards with steady hands. The settlement money from Victor's frozen accounts had made this possible, but the strength to build it came from somewhere deeper. In the front row, Hank sat in a comfortable chair, his injuries healing well under the angel's careful watch. He gave her an encouraging wink, and Sarah felt her heart swell with gratitude. The opening ceremony drew a diverse crowd: domestic violence survivors, corporate whistleblowers, community advocates, and, most surprisingly to outsiders, 24 Hell's Angels. They had traded their usual worn leather for cleaned club jackets, though their beards were still wild, and their tattoos still visible. These men who had become her family sat with quiet dignity, watching proudly as Sarah took the stage. "A year ago," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I thought fear was the only constant in life. I believed survival meant staying silent, staying small." She paused, meeting the eyes of women in the audience who knew that truth too well. "But I learned that fear loses its power when we find the right people. People who show us that family isn't always blood, that strength isn't always loud, and that healing isn't always gentle." In the second row, Mickey wiped his eyes with a bandana while pretending to adjust his glasses. Other angels nodded solemnly, remembering the frightened woman who had collapsed at their gate that rainy night. "The Heartlight Foundation exists because of second chances," Sarah continued. "We'll provide legal aid, job training, and most importantly, a community that understands. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let others help us stand up again." After the ceremony, while volunteers served refreshments and guests networked, Hank made his way to Sarah. "Proud of you, kiddo," he said, pulling her into a careful hug. His ribs were still tender, but his spirit was as strong as ever. "You've built something beautiful here." As evening approached, Jax found Sarah gathering her things. "Come with me," he said softly. "I want to show you something." He led her to his motorcycle, and they rode through the twilight, streets to a familiar building. Sarah smiled as they climbed the stairs to the rooftop, the same place where she had once stood trembling with doubt, convinced she would never be strong enough to face Victor. The city lights sparkled below them like earthbound stars. Sarah breathed in the cool air, remembering how far she'd come. "Last time we were here," she said, turning to Jax, "I was terrified of failing, of getting people hurt." Jax's eyes were gentle. "And now?" "Now I know that you didn't save my life that night in the alley." She stepped closer to him. "You gave me the chance to reclaim it. There's a difference." He nodded, understanding in his expression. Sarah had transformed from a woman running for her life into someone who helped others find their own strength. The fear that once defined her had been replaced by purpose. Jax wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and Sarah leaned into his solid warmth. Below them, the city hummed with life and possibility. She thought about the women who would come to the foundation, carrying the same fears she once had. She would show them what the angels had shown her, that family can be found in unexpected places, that healing comes through helping others, and that every ending can become a new beginning. As she rested her head on Jax's shoulder, Sarah felt completely at peace. Her future stretched before her, bright with promise and unmarked by fear, built on the foundation of love and trust she had found among these unlikely guardians who had become her true family. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.